The cold hit Zelda Prescott's face like 1,000 tiny knives as she stumbled backward, her husband's mother's hands still raised from the violent shove that sent her tumbling into the massive snowdrift piled against the mercantile building. The winter of 1884 had buried Loveland, Colorado, under more snow than anyone could remember, and now Zelda found herself waist deep in the icy white powder, her lungs burning as she gasped for air that felt like shards of glass going down her throat. That's what you get for thinking you could ever replace my son's real wife, Cordelia Whitmore spat, her face twisted with hatred as she stood on the wooden boardwalk above, her heavy wool coat making her look even more imposing than usual. You're nothing but a poor farmer's daughter who tricked my boy into marriage. Zelda struggled to pull herself free, her skirts soaked through and already beginning to freeze in the brutal cold. Her fingers had gone numb, and she could barely feel her legs. The main street of Loveland was nearly empty in the late afternoon, most sensible people having taken shelter from the blizzard that had been threatening all day. Dark clouds rolled overhead, promising even more snow, and the wind howled through the spaces between buildings like a pack of wolves. "Help!" Zelda tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, her chest too tight from the shock of the cold and the impact. She had only been married to Thomas Whitmore for 6 months, and every single day of those 6 months had been a new kind of hell thanks to the woman now walking away from her, leaving her to freeze in the street. Zelda's vision started to blur at the edges, and she realized with growing horror that she might actually die here, alone in this snowdrift while the town went about its business behind closed doors. Her hands scrabbled uselessly at the snow, but she only seemed to sink deeper, the weight of her heavy winter dress dragging her down like an anchor. Then she heard the sound of hoofbeats, fast and urgent, cutting through the howl of the wind. "Whoa there, easy boy!" a deep voice called out, and suddenly a tall figure was dismounting from a paint horse, his boots crunching in the snow as he rushed toward her. "Madam, hold on now, I've got you." Strong hands gripped her arms, and Zelda found herself being pulled free from the snowdrift with a strength that seemed almost effortless. She looked up into a face that was all sharp angles and concern, framed by dark hair that stuck out from beneath a worn cowboy hat. His eyes were a striking hazel color, warm despite the cold surrounding them, and filled with genuine worry. "Can you stand?" he asked, his arms still supporting her as she found her footing on the icy boardwalk. "You're shaking something fierce." "I'm fine," Zelda managed to say through chattering teeth, but even as the words left her mouth, her knees buckled. The cowboy caught her before she could fall, pulling her against his chest with one arm while he used his free hand to brush snow from her face. "No, madam, you're not fine. You're half frozen and soaking wet. Where do you live? I'll take you home." Zelda wanted to laugh at that, but she was afraid if she started, it would turn into something closer to crying. Home. The Whitmore Ranch was 5 miles outside of town, and the thought of going back there, to Thomas, who would take his mother's side like he always did, to the cold house where she had never been welcome, made something inside her chest tighten painfully. "I can't," she whispered, and then she did start to cry, hot tears freezing on her cheeks almost as soon as they fell. "I can't go back there." The cowboy's expression shifted from concern to something harder, his jaw tightening as he looked down the street where Cordelia had disappeared. He seemed to make a decision, nodding to himself before turning back to Zelda. "All right, then. My place is just outside of town, other direction. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You can thaw out there, and then we'll figure out what to do next. Sound fair?" Zelda knew she should protest. She was a married woman, and going to a strange man's home was scandalous at best, dangerous at worst, but her body was already starting to shut down from the cold, and the concern in this stranger's eyes felt more genuine than anything her husband had shown her in months. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The cowboy wasted no time. He swept her up into his arms like she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse with quick, sure steps. He settled her in the saddle before swinging up behind her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping his heavy coat around them both as much as he could manage. "Name's Kieran Irons. he said as he urged his horse forward, one arm wrapped securely around Zelda's waist to keep her steady. I work the Henderson spread. Been in Colorado about 3 years now. Zelda, she managed to say, her teeth still chattering so hard she could barely get the word out. Zelda Prescott, I mean Whitmore. Zelda Whitmore. She felt him stiffen slightly behind her at the name, and she wondered if he knew Thomas, if this kindness would evaporate once he realized whose wife he was helping. But he just tightened his grip on her slightly and urged his horse into a faster pace, leaning down to shield her face from the wind with his shoulder. The ride to his property took less than 15 minutes, but to Zelda it felt like an eternity. She was shaking so hard she thought her bones might rattle apart, and she couldn't feel her hands or feet at all anymore. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the warmth of the body behind her and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Stay with me now, Kieran's voice cut through the fog in her mind. We're almost there, just a little further. True to his word, a small cabin came into view through the swirling snow, smoke rising from its chimney like a beacon. Kieran brought his horse right up to the porch, dismounting quickly before reaching up to lift Zelda down. She couldn't support her own weight anymore, and he carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them with his boot. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a physical force, and Zelda gasped, her body starting to hurt as blood tried to return to her frozen extremities. Kieran carried her to a chair near the fireplace, setting her down gently before kneeling in front of her to assess the damage. Your dress is frozen solid, he said, his hands moving to the buttons at her throat. I need to get you out of these wet clothes before you catch your death. Do you have the strength to help me? Zelda's hands fumbled uselessly at the fabric, her fingers too numb and clumsy to accomplish anything. Kieran made a sound of frustration, not at her but at the situation, and took over, working the buttons free with practiced efficiency. There was nothing improper in his touch, nothing but focused determination to get her warm and dry. I'm going to step into the other room and get you something dry to wear, he said once he had her outer dress unbuttoned. Can you manage the rest, or do you need help? I can manage, Zelda said, though she wasn't at all sure that was true. But the thought of this stranger undressing her completely, no matter how kind his intentions, was too much for her already fractured sense of propriety. Kieran nodded and disappeared into what she assumed was his bedroom, returning moments later with a flannel shirt and a pair of wool pants. These will be big on you, but they're warm and dry. I'll turn my back. You get changed. Take your time. He was true to his word, facing away from her toward the fireplace while Zelda struggled out of her wet things. It took her far longer than it should have, her fingers refusing to cooperate, and her whole body shaking so hard she could barely stand. But eventually she managed to get into the dry clothes, the soft flannel feeling like heaven against her frozen skin. I'm decent, she said quietly, and Kieran turned around, his eyes sweeping over her to assess her condition. Without a word, he moved to the fireplace and stirred up the flames, adding more wood before filling a kettle and hanging it over the fire. Tea will be ready in a few minutes, he said, dragging another chair close to the fire and gesturing for her to sit in it. In the meantime, we need to get circulation back in your hands and feet. This is going to hurt. He was right. As he knelt before her again and took her hands in his, rubbing them gently between his calloused palms, the pain that shot through her fingers made her cry out. But he didn't stop, working methodically to warm each finger, then moving to her feet, which he had wrapped in thick wool socks. I know it hurts, he said softly, his hands moving in steady circles over her feet through the socks. But it means you're thawing out, means there's no permanent damage. Just breathe through it. Zelda focused on his face, instead of the pain, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his mouth was set in a line of concentration. He was handsome in a rough, weather-worn way, probably somewhere in his late 20s, and there was a gentleness in his movements that contrasted sharply with his rugged appearance. Why are you helping me? She asked when she could finally speak without her teeth chattering. You don't know me. Kieran looked up at her, his hazel eyes meeting hers directly. Because you needed help and I was there. Don't need to be more complicated than that. Most people would have just kept writing. I'm not most people. He held her gaze for a moment longer before returning his attention to her feet. And besides, what kind of person pushes someone into a snowdrift and leaves them there? Saw the whole thing from down the street. That woman should be ashamed of herself. That woman is my mother-in-law, Zelda said quietly, and she saw his hands still for just a moment before resuming their work. Explains why you said you couldn't go home. He didn't ask for more details, and Zelda was grateful for that. The tea should be ready. He stood and moved to the fireplace, pouring steaming water into a cup and adding tea leaves from a tin on the mantel. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed, and Zelda felt a jolt of something that had nothing to do with the cold. She took the cup quickly, wrapping both hands around it and breathing in the fragrant steam. Thank you, she said, meeting his eyes again. Truly. You probably saved my life. Kieran settled into the chair across from her, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. You want to tell me what happened? Or would you rather not talk about it? Zelda took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth spread through her chest before answering. I married Thomas Whitmore 6 months ago. I thought I was in love with him, thought he loved me. But his mother never approved of the match. She thinks I'm beneath him, that I trapped him somehow. And Thomas, he doesn't stand up to her. He never has. And today I was in town picking up supplies, and I ran into her outside the mercantile. She started saying horrible things, telling me I was a disgrace to the Whitmore name, that I should leave town and save Thomas the embarrassment of divorcing me. I tried to walk away, and she grabbed my arm. When I pulled free, she pushed me. Hard. Kieran's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. That's assault. You could have the sheriff arrest her. Zelda laughed, a bitter sound. The sheriff is Thomas's uncle. The mayor is his godfather. The Whitmores own half this county. Who do you think anyone would believe? The silence that followed was heavy with the truth of her words. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the cabin and sending a fresh blast of cold air through the cracks. Kieran stood and moved to check the door, making sure it was secure before adding more wood to the fire. You can stay here tonight, he said, not looking at her as he spoke. Storm's getting worse and you're in no condition to go anywhere. I'll sleep out here by the fire. You can have the bed. Tomorrow, when you're stronger, we'll figure out what comes next. I can't ask you to do that, Zelda protested, even though the thought of going back out into the cold made her want to weep. You've already done so much. You're not asking, I'm offering. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Look, I don't know what your situation is exactly. Don't know if your husband is a good man having a hard time or a bad man who's always been that way. But I know that no woman deserves to be treated the way you were today, and I'm not about to send you back out there until I know you're safe. So you're staying, and that's final. The firmness in his voice left no room for argument, and truthfully, Zelda was too exhausted to fight him. She nodded, taking another sip of her tea and feeling her body finally starting to relax as the warmth seeped into her bones. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Zelda studied Kieran when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the way he moved with an easy grace, comfortable in his own space. The cabin was small but well kept, everything in its place, and she could see evidence of a solitary but not lonely life. Books on a shelf, a well-worn saddle in the corner, a guitar hanging on the wall. Do you play? She asked, gesturing to the guitar. Kieran followed her gaze and nodded. Some, learned from an old ranch hand when I was coming up. It's good company on long nights. Will you play something? He looked surprised at the request, but after a moment, he stood and took the guitar down from the wall, settling back into his chair and tuning the strings with practiced ease. When he started to play, the music that filled the cabin was beautiful, a slow, melancholy melody that seemed to match the mood of the storm outside. Zelda closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, feeling tears prick at her eyelids for reasons she couldn't quite name. It had been so long since anyone had done something kind for her, so long since she had felt safe and warm and cared for. Even if it was just for one night, even if she had to go back to her real life tomorrow, she would take this moment and hold it close. When the song ended, she opened her eyes to find Kieran watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "It's an old song my mother used to sing," he replied, setting the guitar aside. "She passed when I was 15. Sometimes playing it makes me feel like she's still around somehow. I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago." He stood and moved to the small kitchen area, opening a cupboard and pulling out some bread and cheese. "You should eat something. Can't remember the last time I saw someone look so worn out." Zelda wanted to protest that she wasn't hungry, but the smell of the bread made her stomach growl loudly enough that they both heard it. Kieran smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face and brought the food over to her. They ate in comfortable silence, and Zelda marveled at how easy it felt to be here with this stranger, easier than it had ever felt to be in her own home with her own husband. When they were finished, Kieran showed her to his bedroom, a small space with a neatly made bed and little else. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," he said, lingering in the doorway. "Don't hesitate to call out." "Thank you, Kieran, for everything." He nodded and pulled the door closed, leaving her alone in the dim room. Zelda sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She knew she should feel guilty, should be worried about what Thomas would think when she didn't come home, about what the town would say if anyone found out she spent the night in another man's cabin. But all she felt was relief, bone deep and overwhelming. She lay down on the bed, still wearing Kieran's borrowed clothes, and pulled the quilts up to her chin. The bed smelled like him, like leather and wood smoke and something else she couldn't quite identify. It should have felt wrong, but instead, it felt like the first right thing that had happened to her in months. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, Zelda felt warm and safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind and the faint melody of guitar music drifting through the door. When she woke the next morning, pale sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could hear movement in the other room. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The Snowdrift, Kieran, the cabin. She sat up slowly, her body aching in places she hadn't known could ache, and made her way to the door. Kieran was at the stove, cooking something that smelled incredible. He turned when he heard the door open, and Zelda saw that he looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. "Morning," he said, gesturing to the table. "Coffee's ready, and breakfast will be done in a minute. How are you feeling?" "Sore but alive," Zelda said honestly, moving to the table and pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pot sitting there. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough." He brought 2 plates to the table, each loaded with eggs and bacon and biscuits. Storm finally died down about an hour ago. Roads should be passable, though not easy. Zelda's stomach twisted at the implication. She would have to go back. Back to Thomas, back to Cordelia, back to her miserable life. She picked at her food, suddenly not hungry despite how good it looked. "What if I don't want to go back?" The words were out before she could stop them, and she looked up at Kieran with something close to desperation in her eyes. "What if I just stayed here?" Kieran set down his fork, his expression serious. "Zelda, you're a married woman. I helped you because you needed help, but I'm not looking to start trouble with the Whitmores or anyone else. You need to go back and face your husband. Tell him what his mother did. Maybe he'll surprise you. Stand up for you this time." "He won't." Zelda's voice was flat, certain. "He never has before. Why would today be different?" "Because you could have died." Kieran leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because his mother assaulted you and left you to freeze in the street. That's not just family drama, that's serious. If he loves you at all, he'll care about that." Zelda wanted to believe him, But 6 months of experience told her otherwise. Still, she knew he was right. She couldn't stay here, couldn't hide from her life no matter how much she wanted to. She nodded slowly, forcing herself to take a bite of her breakfast. They ate in silence, and then Kieran helped her back into her dress, which he had hung by the fire to dry overnight. It was still damp in places and wrinkled beyond repair, but it was better than riding home in his clothes. He saddled his horse while she finished getting ready, and then they set out into the bright, cold morning. The ride to the Whitmore Ranch was silent, Zelda once again sitting in front of Kieran on his horse. But this time there was no urgency, no life or death crisis, just the slow, inevitable march toward a confrontation she was dreading. When the ranch house came into view, a sprawling structure that spoke of old money and older pride, Zelda felt her chest tighten. "I can go in with you," Kieran offered, bringing his horse to a stop at the edge of the property. "Make sure you're safe." "No," Zelda said quickly. "That would only make things worse. Thank you, but I need to do this alone." He helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "If you need help, if things get bad, you come find me. Promise me." Zelda looked up at him, at this man who had shown her more kindness in 12 hours than her own husband had in 6 months, and felt something shift in her chest. "I promise." She walked toward the house on unsteady legs, aware of Kieran watching her go but not looking back. The front door opened before she reached it, and Thomas stepped out onto the porch, his face a mask of fury. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, his voice loud enough to echo across the yard. "Mother said you caused a scene in town yesterday and then disappeared. Do you have any idea how that looks?" Zelda stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Your mother pushed me into a snowdrift and left me there to freeze. I could have died." "That's ridiculous. Mother said you slipped and fell, that she tried to help you, but you ran off like a madwoman." Thomas came down the steps, looming over her. "Now where were you all night?" "A cowboy found me and took me to his cabin so I wouldn't freeze to death." Zelda met her husband's eyes steadily, even though her heart was pounding. "His name is Kieran Irons, and he saved my life." Thomas's face went red, a vein pulsing in his temple. "You spent the night in another man's cabin? Do you have any idea what that means? You've disgraced yourself, disgraced this family." "I was dying." "Thomas!" Zelda's voice rose, months of frustration and hurt finally bubbling over. "Your mother tried to kill me, and you're worried about what the neighbors will think? My mother would never do such a thing. You're hysterical." Thomas grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Get inside. We need to discuss what we're going to do about this situation you've created." Zelda tried to pull away, but his grip was iron tight. "Thomas, you're hurting me." "You don't know what hurt is yet," he said, his voice low and dangerous as he started to drag her toward the house. "After the embarrassment you've caused, you're lucky I don't throw you out right now. Let her go." The voice came from behind them, calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of threat. Zelda and Thomas both turned to see Kieran still sitting on his horse, watching them with those hazel eyes that had gone cold and hard. "This is none of your concern, Irons," Thomas said, though Zelda noticed he loosened his grip on her arm slightly. "This is a private family matter. Didn't look private from where I was sitting. Looked like a man putting hands on a woman who didn't want them there." Kieran dismounted slowly, deliberately, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Now I'm going to ask you one more time, nice and polite. Let her go." Thomas released Zelda's arm with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, Cowboy. The Whitmore name carries weight in this county. I could have you run out of Colorado by sundown." "Maybe so," Kieran agreed, moving to stand between Zelda and Thomas. "But not before I tell every person in Loveland what your mother did and what you just did. Wonder how that weight will hold up when people know the truth about how you treat your wife." For a moment, Zelda thought Thomas might actually throw a punch, his whole body vibrating with rage. But then Cordelia appeared in the doorway, her face twisted with disdain. Thomas, get inside, she commanded. Don't lower yourself to brawling with hired help over that worthless girl. Something in Zelda snapped. Maybe it was the events of the past 24 hours. Maybe it was the sight of Kieran standing up for her when her own husband wouldn't. But suddenly she was done being afraid, done being small and quiet and accommodating. My name is Zelda, she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, and I am not worthless. I am the woman your son claimed to love, the woman he promised to cherish and protect. But all you've done since the day we married is try to drive me away. And Thomas, you've let her. Zelda, Thomas started, but she cut him off. No, I'm done. I'm done with the insults, done with the coldness, done with feeling like I have to apologize for existing. Your mother assaulted me yesterday. She could have killed me. And instead of being concerned for my safety, you're worried about appearances. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you are. The silence that followed was deafening. Cordelia looked like she might actually explode, her face purple with rage. Thomas just stared at Zelda like he had never seen her before. And Kieran, when Zelda glanced at him, was watching her with something like pride in his eyes. I want an annulment, Zelda said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Or a divorce, whatever it takes. I'm leaving. You can't leave, Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're my wife. On paper, maybe, but in every way that matters, I stopped being your wife the first time you took your mother's side over mine. Zelda turned to Kieran. Will you help me gather my things? Be my pleasure, he said quietly. They moved past Thomas and Cordelia into the house, and Zelda led Kieran to the small room she had been given when she married. Not the master bedroom, which Thomas still shared with no one, but a spare room that had once been a maid's quarters. She had very few possessions, everything she owned fitting into one small trunk. Kieran lifted the trunk easily, carrying it out of the house while Zelda followed behind him. Thomas and Cordelia had disappeared somewhere inside, not even bothering to try to stop her. The message was clear. She had never really been wanted here anyway. Getting the trunk onto the horse was a challenge, but Kieran managed it, securing it behind the saddle before helping Zelda up. As they rode away from the Whitmore Ranch, Zelda felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Where will you go? Kieran asked as they made their way back toward town. Do you have family? My parents have a farm about 30 miles north of here, Zelda said. But I can't go there. Not yet. My father was so proud when I married Thomas. He thought I was securing my future. I don't think I can face him and admit what a mistake it all was. Then you'll stay with me, Kieran said. And when Zelda started to protest, he continued, just temporarily, until you figure out what you want to do. My reputation can take the hit better than yours can, and like I said last night, my cabin's not much, but it's warm and dry. Zelda knew she should refuse, knew that staying with Kieran would only fuel the gossip that was probably already spreading through Loveland, but the alternative was going to her parents in shame or trying to find work in town where the Whitmore influence reached everywhere. At least with Kieran, she felt safe. Just for a few days, she agreed, until I can figure something out. Those few days turned into a week, and that week turned into 2. Kieran went about his work on the Henderson Ranch during the day, leaving early and coming home at sunset. Zelda spent her time cleaning his cabin, cooking meals, and trying to figure out what to do with her life. She had no money, no prospects, and a reputation that was probably in tatters by now. But she also had something she hadn't expected: happiness. Life with Kieran was simple but good. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. He played guitar in the evenings while she mended his clothes or worked on her own sewing projects. They laughed together, something Zelda couldn't remember doing with Thomas even once. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice it happening, Zelda realized she was falling in love with him. It wasn't the wild, passionate infatuation she had felt for Thomas. It was something quieter, deeper, built on respect and kindness and genuine caring. It was in the way Kieran always made sure she had enough firewood, the way he asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. It was in the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, his eyes soft with an emotion she didn't dare name. The trouble came on a cold February evening, 3 weeks after Zelda had left the Whitmore ranch. Kieran came home earlier than usual, his face grim. Thomas was in town today, he said, hanging up his coat and hat. He's telling everyone who'll listen that I kidnapped you, that you're being held against your will. Zelda's stomach dropped. That's ridiculous. Maybe so, but people are listening. The Henderson family is starting to ask questions, wondering if they want someone with that kind of trouble working their ranch. Kieran ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I don't care what they say about me, but I won't have you made out to be some kind of victim in this. Then we'll tell the truth, Zelda said, moving to stand in front of him. I'll go into town, tell everyone what really happened. You think they'll believe you over a Whitmore? Kieran shook his head. No. What needs to happen is you need to go back. This was always temporary anyway. The words hit Zelda like a physical blow. You want me to leave? I want you to be safe and have a life, Kieran said. But he wouldn't meet her eyes. This, what we're doing here, it's not sustainable. You're still married, even if you're separated. And every day you stay here is another day your reputation gets worse. I don't care about my reputation. Zelda grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Kieran, I'm happy here. Happier than I've been in years, maybe ever. Please don't send me away. Zelda! Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. Don't you understand? I'm trying to do the right thing here. You deserve better than this. Better than hiding away in a cabin with a cowboy who can barely keep himself fed, let alone provide for a wife. I don't want to be provided for. I want to be loved. The words hung in the air between them. Too honest. Too raw. The way you've loved me these past 3 weeks, even if you've never said it out loud. Kieran's eyes widened, and then he was moving, closing the distance between them and cupping her face in his hands. Of course I love you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Been falling for you since the moment I pulled you out of that snowdrift. But that doesn't change the facts. You're married to another man, and I'm nobody, nothing. I can't give you the life you deserve. The life I deserve? Zelda felt tears streaming down her face, but didn't bother to wipe them away. I deserve to be with someone who sees me, who values me, who makes me feel like I matter. Thomas never did that, but you do, Kieran. Every single day you do. He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. Zelda buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, trying to memorize this moment in case it was the last one they had. I'll fight for you, Kieran said quietly. If that's what you want, I'll help you get your annulment, and then I'll court you proper, the way I should have from the start. But it's not going to be easy. The Whitmores won't let you go without a fight. I don't care. Zelda pulled back to look up at him, her hands fisted in his shirt. Let them fight. I'm not going back to that life, Kieran. I'd rather live in scandal with you than in misery with them. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the kisses she had shared with Thomas, which had always felt perfunctory, like he was checking off a box on a list of husbandly duties. Kieran kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, like she was the most important thing in his world. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. We'll do this right, he said. I'll talk to a lawyer in Denver, someone outside the Whitmore sphere of influence. We'll get you free, legal, and proper. And then I'm going to marry you, if you'll have me. I'll have you, Zelda whispered, and kissed him again. The next few months were difficult. Thomas contested the annulment, claiming Zelda had abandoned him and committed adultery. Zelda had to travel to Denver twice to meet with lawyers to give testimony about her marriage and why it should be dissolved. The Whitmores used every ounce of their influence to try to make things difficult, but the lawyer Kieran found was good, and eventually the truth came out. Cordelia's assault, which multiple people had witnessed but been too afraid to speak up about. Thomas's neglect, his refusal to stand up to his mother, the separate bedrooms that indicated the marriage had never been truly consummated. Slowly but surely, the case built itself, and in late May of 1884, Zelda received word that her marriage to Thomas Whitmore had been legally annulled. She cried when she got the news, not from sadness, but from relief. She was free, truly, finally free. Kieran proposed that same night, not with a fancy ring or a grand gesture, but with a simple question asked over dinner in their tiny cabin. Will you marry me, Zelda? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way you deserve? She said yes before he even finished speaking. They were married a week later by a judge in Loveland, with two ranch hands from the Henderson spread serving as witnesses. It wasn't the big wedding Zelda had dreamed of as a girl, but it was perfect in its simplicity, in the genuine joy on Kieran's face, as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. That night, in the bedroom of the cabin that was now truly theirs, Kieran loved her with a tenderness and passion that made her understand for the first time what it was supposed to feel like. This was what she had been missing, this connection, this sense of being completely known and completely accepted. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Kieran continued working at the Henderson Ranch, and Zelda took in sewing work to contribute to their income. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a good one, filled with laughter and love and the kind of peace Zelda had never thought she would find. The town gossips eventually moved on to other scandals, and while the Whitmore family never forgave Zelda for leaving, they also never bothered her again. Thomas remarried within the year, this time to a woman his mother approved of, and Zelda wished him well from a distance. In the spring of 1885, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and sick in the mornings, and when she finally went to see the doctor in town, he confirmed what she had already started to suspect. She was going to have a baby. Kieran's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests that he would make her dizzy, his face split by the biggest smile she had ever seen. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he couldn't quite believe it. "You're going to make me a father." The pregnancy was difficult at times, especially in the summer heat, but Kieran was attentive to her every need. He made sure she rested, brought her water and food, rubbed her aching feet at the end of long days. And when she woke in the middle of the night with fears about childbirth, about whether she would be a good mother, he held her and promised that everything would be all right. Their son was born on a cold November night, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him James after Kieran's father, and Zelda had never seen anything more beautiful than her husband holding their newborn son, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered, looking from the baby to Zelda and back again. "Thank you for this. For him. For giving me a family. We're in this together," Zelda reminded him, exhausted but happy. "You, me, and James. Our family." James was a healthy, happy baby who grew quickly, and by the time he was a year old, he was already showing signs of having his father's stubborn independence and his mother's quick mind. Zelda loved being a mother, loved watching Kieran with their son, the gentle way he handled the boy, the patience he showed teaching him new things. In the summer of 1887, Zelda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She was smaller than James had been, more delicate, with Zelda's dark hair and Kieran's hazel eyes. Kieran was completely smitten, declaring that he now had two of the most beautiful women in the world to take care of. Life continued its steady, happy pace. Kieran eventually saved enough to buy his own piece of land, a small ranch where he could raise horses. It was hard work building something from nothing, but they did it together. Zelda working alongside him when the children were napping or playing, their dreams slowly taking shape. By 1890, the ranch was thriving. They had a dozen horses, a small herd of cattle, and a house that was bigger than the cabin had been, with room for their growing family. James was 5 and already helping his father with small chores around the ranch. Rose was 3, a whirlwind of energy who kept Zelda on her toes. And in the fall of that year, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because life in general felt easier now that they were more established. Their third child, another son they named Samuel, was born in the spring of 1891. Zelda sometimes thought back to that day in the Snowdrift, to how different her life could have turned out if Kieran hadn't come along when he did. She thought about the woman she had been, so lost and unhappy, and barely recognized her. That woman had been a ghost, going through the motions of life without really living. Now, she was alive in every sense of the word. She woke each morning next to a man who loved her deeply and showed it in 1,000 small ways. She spent her days raising children who were happy and healthy and loved. She had work that challenged her, a home that was truly hers, and a future that stretched out bright with possibility. On a warm summer evening in 1895, Zelda stood on the porch of their ranch house watching Kieran play with their children in the yard. James was 10 now, tall for his age and already showing signs of the man he would become. Rose was 8, her laughter ringing out as she chased after her younger brothers. Samuel was 4, trying his best to keep up with his older siblings. And then there was the baby, little Catherine, just 6 months old, and sleeping peacefully in Zelda's arms. Their fourth and likely final child, another daughter with her father's smile and her mother's determination. Kieran looked up from where he was showing James how to properly hold a rope for lassoing and caught Zelda watching them. His face softened, and he said something to James before jogging over to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sliding an arm around her waist and pressing a kiss to her temple, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "Just remembering," Zelda said, leaning into his warmth. "Remembering how it all started, how different things could have been." "Regrets?" Kieran asked quietly, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Not a single one." Zelda turned her head to look at him, at the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "Except maybe that I didn't find you sooner." "We found each other when we were supposed to," Kieran said, a philosophy he had expressed many times over the years. "Everything that came before, all the hard times, they led us to this, to our family, our life together. I wouldn't change a thing." "Neither would I," Zelda agreed, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They stood there together, watching their children play as the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Zelda thought about that terrified woman in the snowdrift, about how she couldn't have imagined then that such happiness was possible. But it was possible. It was real. It was hers. And it all started with a cowboy who had helped her up and taken her home. The years continued to pass in a blur of birthdays and holidays, of harsh winters and beautiful springs. James grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Kieran got older. Rose turned out to have a gift with the horses, able to gentle even the most skittish mare with patience and soft words. Samuel was the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of attending university someday. And Catherine, their baby, was growing into a bright, curious girl who questioned everything and feared nothing. Zelda and Kieran grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and fear, but they always came back to each other, always remembered what they had built and why it mattered. In the spring of 1900, as a new century dawned, Zelda turned 35 years old. Kieran threw her a party, inviting all their neighbors and friends, and Zelda found herself surrounded by love and laughter, by the life she had built from the ashes of her first failed marriage. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left and the children had been put to bed, Zelda and Kieran sat on their porch swing, watching the stars come out one by one. Kieran's arm was around her shoulders, and Zelda's head rested against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever wonder what Thomas is doing now?" Kieran asked, a question he had never asked before in all their years together. Zelda considered it for a moment before answering. "No," she said honestly. "I hope he's happy, hope he found whatever he was looking for, but I don't think about him anymore. That life feels like it happened to someone else." "In a way, it did," Kieran said thoughtfully. "You're not the same woman you were then." "No, I'm not." Zelda smiled, thinking about how much she had changed, how much she had grown. That woman was afraid of everything, afraid to speak up, afraid to want more than what she was given. "I'm not afraid anymore." "Good," Kieran said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You should never be afraid. Not with me, not ever." "I know." And she did know, with a certainty that went bone deep. Kieran was her safe harbor, her home, the person who had shown her what love really looked like. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, until Zelda finally said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For stopping that day, for helping me up, for taking me home." Zelda pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "For loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. For giving me this life, this family, this happiness. For everything." Kieran's eyes were suspiciously bright as he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking gently over her cheekbones. "Zelda Irons, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life, and I do it all again, every single moment, just to end up right here with you." He kissed her then, sweet and slow, and full of 16 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, Zelda rested her forehead against his and smiled. "Let's go to bed," she whispered. "Tomorrow's another day, and I want to wake up next to you to see it." "Always," Kieran promised, and they went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held because they knew they would face it together. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most respected horse operations in Colorado. James eventually took over the day-to-day running of it, allowing Kieran to slow down a bit as he reached his 50s. Rose married a kind young man from a neighboring ranch and started her own family, though she still came by regularly to work with the horses. Samuel went off to university in Denver, studying to become a lawyer, determined to help people who found themselves in situations like his mother had been in all those years ago. And Catherine, their youngest, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a doctor, unheard of for a woman, but supported wholeheartedly by her parents. Through it all, Zelda and Kieran remained the foundation, the steady center around which their family revolved. They were the example their children looked to, the proof that real love existed, that it was worth fighting for, that it could sustain you through even the hardest times. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Zelda back to the cabin where they had spent their first night together. It was still standing, though they had long since moved to the bigger house, and they had kept it maintained as a guest house and a reminder of where they had started. "I wanted to bring you back here," Kieran said, as they stood in the small main room, so much smaller than Zelda remembered. "Wanted to remind you of what we built from nothing." Zelda looked around, at the chair where she had first thawed out, at the fireplace where Kieran had played guitar for her, at the bedroom door through which she had found her first real peace in years. "It's not nothing," she said softly. "This place was everything. It was hope. It was safety. It was the beginning of the rest of my life." "Our life," Kieran corrected gently, pulling her into his arms. "Everything I have, everything I am, I share with you. That's what marriage is supposed to be." "That's what our marriage is," Zelda agreed, "and I wouldn't change a single thing about it." They made love that night in the small cabin, just as they had on their wedding night 20 years ago, and it felt like coming home in the most profound way. Afterward, lying in Kieran's arms, Zelda felt a completeness that she knew was rare and precious. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too. I love you too, Kieran replied, his arms tightening around her. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda. You and our family. I thank God every day for that snowdrift, for being in the right place at the right time, for having the courage to stop and help. It wasn't courage, Zelda said. It was who you are. You see someone who needs help and you help them. It's one of the things I love most about you. Well, I'm glad I helped you, Kieran said with a smile she could hear in his voice. Best decision I ever made. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and when they woke in the morning, they made their way back to the big house, to their children and grandchildren who had come to help celebrate their anniversary, to the life they had built together one day at a time. As Zelda stood on the porch of her home, watching her family gathered in the yard, she thought about that cold February day in 1884 when everything had changed. She thought about the scared, desperate woman she had been and the strong, confident woman she had become. She thought about Kieran, about his kindness and his love and his unwavering support. And she thought about how sometimes the worst moments of your life can lead to the best ones, how sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you were really looking for all along. She had lost a marriage, a name, a life that had never really fit her anyway. But she had gained so much more. She had gained love, real and true and lasting. She had gained a partner who saw her as an equal, who valued her opinion, who made her feel cherished every single day. She had gained children and grandchildren, a legacy that would outlast them both. She had gained herself, the woman she was always meant to be. And it had all started with a cowboy who helped her up and took her home. Not to the home she had been trying to get to, but to the home she needed, the home she deserved, the home they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, with love as their foundation and commitment as their guide. As the sun set on another beautiful Colorado evening, Kieran came up behind Zelda and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Irons," he murmured in her ear. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Irons," Zelda replied, covering his hands with her own. "Here's to 20 more years, and 20 more after that." "Here's to forever," Kieran said, and Zelda couldn't think of a better toast than that. Forever with this man, with this family, with this life they had created together. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, more than she had ever thought possible. And every single day, she was grateful for it, grateful for him, grateful for that moment in the snowdrift that had changed everything. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing new joys and sorrows, new challenges and triumphs. There were winters when the snow was so deep they could barely leave the house for days, and summers when the heat was so oppressive they slept on the porch to catch any hint of a breeze. There were births and deaths, weddings and funerals, the natural rhythms of a life fully lived. Through it all, Zelda and Kieran remained each other's constant. They celebrated their children's successes and comforted them through their failures. They welcomed son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws into the family, and eventually grandchildren who they spoiled shamelessly. They worked side by side to keep the ranch running, their partnership as strong in business as it was in love. When Zelda turned 50, Kieran threw her another party, this one even bigger than the last. All 4 of their children were there with their families, along with neighbors and friends from all over the county. As Zelda looked around at the gathered crowd, at the life she had built, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and accomplishment. "You did good, Ma," James said, coming up to give her a hug. He was 30 now, with children of his own, but he still called her Ma, just like he had when he was little. "You and Pa both. This family, this ranch, It's something to be proud of. We are proud, Zelda assured him, every single day. Later, when the party had wound down and it was just the immediate family left, Catherine approached Zelda with a question. At 21, she was home from medical school for the summer, and she had been unusually quiet all evening. Ma, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Catherine glanced around to make sure no one else was listening before continuing. How did you know? That Pa was the right one, I mean. How did you know he was worth leaving your first husband for? Zelda studied her youngest daughter, seeing the uncertainty in her eyes and guessing at the source. Is there a boy? There's a man, Catherine corrected. Another medical student. He's wonderful, Ma, but he's different from what I always thought I wanted, and I'm scared that if I pursue this, if I let myself fall for him, I'll be giving up other possibilities. Let me tell you something, Zelda said, taking Catherine's hand and pulling her down to sit beside her on the porch step. When I met your father, I was in the worst situation of my life. I was trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing my spirit, with a mother-in-law who hated me and a husband who didn't care enough to protect me. And then this cowboy came along and showed me what it meant to be truly seen, truly valued. But how did you know he was different? Because he made me feel like myself, Zelda said simply. With Thomas, I was always trying to be someone I wasn't, always walking on eggshells, always worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. With your father, I could just be. He never asked me to change or diminish myself to make him comfortable. And that feeling, that freedom to be yourself with someone, that's how you know. Catherine nodded slowly. This man, he makes me feel like that. Like I can talk about my dreams and my fears, and he actually listens. Like he sees me, the real me, not just what everyone expects me to be. Then I think you have your answer, Zelda said, squeezing her daughter's hand. Love isn't about finding someone who fits a list of requirements. It's about finding someone who makes you better, who supports you in becoming who you're meant to be. Your father did that for me, and it sounds like this young man might do that for you. Thank you, Ma, Catherine said, hugging her tightly. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Always. Watching Catherine walk away, Zelda felt Kieran settle onto the step beside her. Good advice, he said, having clearly been close enough to overhear. Just speaking from experience, Zelda replied, leaning against him. You did make me better, you know. Made me braver, stronger, more myself. Pretty sure that was all you, Kieran said. I just gave you a safe place to figure it out. We gave each other that, Zelda corrected. That's what partners do. They sat together as the stars came out, just as they had countless times before, comfortable in the silence and in each other's presence. This was what love looked like after 26 years, Zelda thought. Not the passionate, all-consuming fire of new romance, but the steady, warming glow of a well-tended hearth, just as necessary, just as beautiful, and far more sustaining. The ranch passed its 30th year of operation with great success. The Irons name had become synonymous with quality horses throughout Colorado and even beyond, with buyers coming from as far away as California to purchase their stock. James had taken over completely now, with Kieran only occasionally offering advice or helping with the easier tasks. At 62, Kieran had earned his rest, though he still rose early most mornings out of habit, unable to shake decades of ranch life. Zelda had slowed down too, though she still took in the occasional sewing project and loved nothing more than spending time with her grandchildren, of which there were now 8, with another on the way. She had become the matriarch of the family, the one everyone came to for advice and comfort, and she wore the role with grace and wisdom. One evening in the fall of 1910, Zelda and Kieran sat on their porch as they had so many times before, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with the evidence of lives well lived. But when they looked at each other, They still saw the people they had been 26 years ago, young and scared and hopeful. Do you remember that first night? Zelda asked softly, her hand in Kieran's as always. When you brought me here and gave me your clothes to wear? I remember, Kieran said, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met, standing up to your husband like that, even though you were half frozen and exhausted. I was terrified, Zelda admitted. But I was also done being small, done being afraid. You gave me the courage to choose myself. You had that courage all along, Kieran insisted. I just happened to be there when you decided to use it. Stop being humble, Zelda said with a smile. You saved my life, multiple times, in multiple ways. It's okay to take credit for that. All right, I saved your life, Kieran agreed. And you saved mine right back by agreeing to marry me and making me the happiest man in Colorado. Just Colorado? Zelda teased. The whole world, Kieran amended. The whole universe. Better? Much better. Zelda leaned over to kiss him, soft and sweet and comfortable, after 3 decades together. I love you, Kieran Irons. Thank you for the most wonderful life. I love you too, Zelda. Always have, always will. They sat together until the stars came out, until the mountain air grew too cold and they had to go inside. They made their way to bed, helping each other with buttons and laces the way they had for years, comfortable in their routine and in their love for each other. That night, Zelda dreamed of snowdrifts and cowboys, of moments that changed everything and love that lasted forever. And when she woke the next morning, Kieran's arms around her and sunshine streaming through their window, she smiled and thanked whatever force of fate had put her in that snowdrift 26 years ago. Because sometimes the worst day of your life leads to all your best days. Sometimes falling down is how you find someone to help you up. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that someone becomes the person you spend the rest of your life with, building something beautiful out of the ruins of what came before. Zelda and Kieran lived out their days on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. They celebrated 50 years of marriage, then 55, Kieran joking that he'd make it to 60 out of sheer stubbornness. They rocked grandbabies and told stories, and watched their legacy grow and flourish. And through it all, they loved each other with a devotion that became legendary in the county, the cowboy and the woman he pulled from a snowdrift, the love story that started with kindness and grew into something that would outlast them both. When Kieran passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87, with Zelda holding his hand, his last words were, "Thank you for saying yes." And Zelda, even through her grief, smiled because she knew exactly what he meant. Thank you for saying yes to the marriage proposal, yes to the life together, yes to all the moments big and small that had made up their extraordinary love story. Zelda lived another 3 years, long enough to see her youngest great-grandchild born, long enough to know that the family she and Kieran had built would continue long after they were gone. And when she finally passed, also peacefully in her sleep, those who knew her swore she went with a smile on her face, happy to be reunited with the cowboy who had loved her so well. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but meaningful. And every year on the anniversary of the day they met, their descendants gathered there to tell the story of how it all began, of the woman in the snowdrift and the cowboy who stopped to help, ensuring that their love story would never be forgotten. Because some love stories are just too beautiful to die, too powerful to fade, too important to let slip away into history. And the love story of Zelda and Kieran Irons was exactly that kind of story, one that would be told and retold for generations, inspiring others to choose kindness, to choose love, to choose each other no matter what obstacles stood in their way. It was a love story for the ages, born in the harsh winter of 1884 and lasting until long after both of them had left this world. And it all started with a simple act of compassion, a cowboy helping a woman up from a snowdrift and taking her home. Not to the home she had been trying to reach, but to the home she was always meant to find, to him, to their life together. to love.